Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Super fun video for you all today. We are going to do a deep dive into no-till garden starting, and by we, I really mean my co-founder in No-Till Growers, Jackson Rollett. He recently started a half-acre no-till garden, and in this video gives you a complete rundown, including site assessment, materials and amendments used, cost, and so much more. We've done broad overviews of garden starting in the past, like this video, but today you're going to get a lot more technical detail and see it in a more start to finish sort of way, which is rad, but also very helpful. One last thing is, if you enjoy our work, please consider picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook from no-tillgrowers.com or other merch. That helps to keep these videos coming. Yeah, all right, here's the co-founder of No-Till Growers, Jackson Rollett.
We are here at An Apostle's Garden, my fifth garden in 10 years, and we are on the grounds of Holy Apostles Orthodox Church here in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where we lease about 1.5 acres to 2 acres, but we are only cultivating approximately 1/2 acre in bed space at the moment. So we started this garden in May of 2023 is when we started working out here. The first thing that I did was get a good site assessment. So what that entailed was getting a soil test, walking the land to see how it laid, to see where the low spots were and if there were going to be any drainage issues, and then also look at the site on the web soil survey. To start with, getting a soil test, I marked out approximately where I wanted the initial round of beds to go. So we ended up with 4 plots that are 50 by 100 feet. And so after marking those out, I went through and took a soil sample and got a number of cores from each spot, about 6 inches deep. And since this is one contiguous field, I just mixed all of those in a bucket, and that was my one soil sample that I used for the entire 1/2 acre of production. I sent that off to Logan Labs. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't remember how much that cost. Maybe we could put it over here somewhere. And really, there are a few things that I'm looking for when I do a soil test. I know it's a divisive issue. I know you can send soil tests to different places and get different results. But really, all I'm looking for are any significant deficiencies in micronutrients that can be applied when I do an initial tillage. That way I can go ahead and work those into the soil. The other 2 things that I'm looking for are pH, to make sure that my pH is level. Here we don't have too many pH issues. We seem to be right where we need to be. The other thing that I'm looking for is percent organic matter. So to be clear, when we started this new garden, we were starting with 4.5% organic matter, which is probably more than any other farm that I have grown on combined. So we were very blessed to have a really high organic matter here. And then the other thing that I did was get a really good site assessment. So fortunately, I've been going to church here. My family's been going to church here for several years now. So we've seen this field every week, at least once a week throughout all of the seasons of the year. I know that there's a low spot on this ground. It's right underneath where the tunnels are, which is not ideal. But I do know that even with the significant rains that we've had this spring, there's no ponding or pooling or water issues. So even though it's a low spot, I know that the drainage on this plot is good. So that's not anything that we're going to have to worry about. You know, here in officially zone 7, we get 55 to 60 or more inches of rain a year, and it's been a very wet spring. So we can always add water when we need to. We are fortunate to have a lot of easy access to water here, but it's a lot harder to take it away. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any drainage or water issues when we were setting up the plots, or if it was anything that we could avoid. So you can go back and check how to determine drainage rates there, or even compaction issues like the rebar test. I really like using a piece of rebar, but particularly because the penetrometer is going to determine pounds per square inch. Or if you look at the end of a rebar, that piece is about 1 square inch, and then you can kind of guess how much weight you're putting on it. So I'm about 150 pounds, and I can determine if I can get that rebar into the ground fairly easily. I know I'm well below the 150-pound compaction rate. So you can go to the Web Soil Survey, I believe it's websoilsurvey.com, type in the location or the address of the field that you want to look for, and mark out the parameters on a map using this tool here. And then you can get a profile of the field that you're looking at. So there might be some information on there that you can't see just by looking at the field, like typical depth to the water table or any restrictive features that are below the soil. You can get a little better picture of the slope of the land or the contours of the land using the Web Soil Survey as well. So that's a great tool that I recommend everybody use. One more note about a site assessment is, like, what is the vegetation telling you? I don't know a lot about weeds and what they mean, but I do know that I can walk out into a field and see what vegetation that I'm going to have to deal with as a grower in the future. So whenever we walk this field, we know that it had a lot of red clover, a lot of Johnson grass, and I knew that I was going to have to get that under control before we started producing. So walking the field is going to give you a really good idea about what weeds you're going to curse for the rest of your life. Hopefully not. So knowing that we had a lot of Johnson grass here, I was going to have to find a way to tarp or occultate the ground for as long as humanly possible before we pulled it back. And I was going to need to do that during the Johnson grass's growing season. You can tarp over the winter, and that might clear some ground depending on the species that you're dealing with, but it's not going to do anything to summer grasses. They're just going to come back. So, like I said, we started in May of last year, and after getting a soil test, after seeing what weeds were out there, I mowed the section that was going to be garden space very low, and I stretched out 4 50 by 100 Farmer's Friend tarps. So one of the experiments that we're running here is what effect tarping or occultation has on perennial Johnson grass or rhizomous Johnson grass. So one of the plots was tarped for 3 months. That was pulled off and put into fall production of carrots and garlic. Another tarp was left on there for 3 months and pulled off for overwinter production of brassicas and root crops. That's also where our caterpillar tunnels went. The third quadrant, or the third tarp, was left on for approximately 6 months. It was pulled off and sown to a cover crop of winter wheat. And then a fourth tarp was left on for approximately 9 months. So from May till the following spring, early spring, late winter, that was pulled off and beds were made for spring production of brassicas and root vegetables. And one of the things that I like to stress is a sort of order of operations for using tarps to manage weeds. So generally how it breaks down on this garden is we leave the tarps down for as long as possible to take care of the particular weeds we need to take care of. So in the case of Johnson grass, as long as possible. So the tarps were left on. When they are pulled back, that is when we add our amendments based on our soil test, and I've got a breakdown of what amendments we did use and the amounts and the dollar value. So we'll keep a running total here for people that are playing the game at home. So we added those amendments to a plot after the tarp is pulled up, and we did that using just a typical lawn spreader. So we mixed the amendments together in the appropriate amount per 50 by 100 foot plot, apply it with a spreader, and then that's when we do our initial tillage with a rotary plow. So we will go ahead and rotary plow the plot laterally, not the direction of the beds, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So we're incorporating all of those mineral amendments. This is also like the ideal time to incorporate any organic matter you have, like compost, but we just don't have access to any. So one of the caveats to starting this garden is we're doing it without compost. Now we are using a little bit of wood chips and a lot of leaf mold for its mulching effect, but we're not using any compost as such when starting this garden. So we rotary plow in all of our mineral amendments, and then we wait for a rain. And after that rain, we're going to recover the area with the tarp for at least an additional 2 weeks, more like 4 to 6 weeks if we're doing it in the winter time. And what that's going to do after we do our initial tillage and bring all of those weed seeds to the surface, since we don't have compost for a mulch, or we're not doing any plastic mulch or anything like that, we are terminating all of those annual weeds that come to the surface. So when we pull the tarp back the second time, we've taken care of our perennial weed issues with the initial tarping, and then we have taken care of most of our annual weed issues with the second tarping. So then when we pull it back, it's time to go ahead and prep beds. Now, one of the reasons that we plow the plot laterally is you get these weird furrows on either side of your plot when you're using the rotary plow. So what we did was fill in that space with a lot of wood chips, and then we put a 3-foot wide woven fabric weed barrier down just at the head of the bed or of the plot, and that's where our irrigation header is going to go. That way, you know, as we're irrigating throughout the season, we don't have to worry about moving it to mow underneath it or it getting weedy. You know, when it's leaking water, weeds really like to accumulate there. And just a note about like the BCS and the rotary plow and some of the other implements that I use on the farm. I really think this is a good opportunity because we only use the rotary plow really to set up beds or to fix any drainage issues that we see. These are tools that aren't necessarily time sensitive, and I think that a BCS could be shared amongst several half-acre to 1-acre market gardens. Just because when you're producing in this style, you just don't need that level of mechanization all the time, and you certainly don't need it right away. It's something that you could plan or schedule out, and it would be a super, super easy tool and very costly tool that could definitely be shared. So yeah, after a few weeks under the tarp, few is a totally legitimate number down here in the South, we pull it back and we're ready to prepare our beds. So the order in which I do bed prep is when we pull the tarp off, we'll go ahead and mark out where the beds are going to be. Now I do beds a little differently. I do a 3-foot wide bed and a 2-foot wide walkway. I like a little more walkway than just 18 inches. I grow a not small number of larger crops, especially in the fall. So Brussels sprouts, a lot of full-size kale, cabbages, stuff that also tends to canopy out into the aisleway. If you've got just 18-inch pathways and 30-inch beds, then you've got to tromp through a lot of those crops and break off some leaves, or you can't get harvest bins down when they have fully canopied out. So I like that extra 6 inches of aisleway, and I just took that extra 6 inches and I just applied it to the next bed. So instead of 30 inches, I've got 36 inches. So spreading everything out just a little bit, I feel like makes for a lot more space to move around comfortably in, which I think is just as important, if not more important than efficiency, is being able to move comfortably. The other thing that we did is we have 50-foot long beds. So we're not doing 100-foot beds, we're doing 50-foot. You could really psychologically wrap your head around 50 feet's worth of work better than you can 100 feet's worth of work. So it allows us to stay a little more motivated. The other reason is 50 feet's worth of material is a lot easier to manage by one person than 100 feet's worth of material, especially if you're getting into tarps that have water on them or medium weight row covers that span multiple beds. Because of the size of this garden, it's only a half-acre, so we're probably only able to employ 1.5 full-timers. Given when a certain job needs to be done, say with a tarp or with row covers, I'm not always going to have a dedicated other person out here with me, or maybe I'm not going to be here and my part-timer is here. They're going to need to be able to navigate those materials by themselves. And if we've got 100-foot long stretches of tarps, those are a lot more difficult to deal with than a 50-foot section. So that's the other reason that we've broken things off into 50-foot beds. On top of that, Farmer's Friend tarp is 50 by 100. So we just use that as a standard plot layout. So in a 50 by 100 foot space, given 5-foot bed centers, we've got about 20 beds in each plot. Now in each plot, I've subdivided that in half. So really for planning purposes, I have 10 beds in a section, 20 beds in a plot, and 4 plots in my field. And then one more reason, I forgot about this, why we broke things off into 50-foot sections is for caterpillar tunnels. So this being a lease situation, and we're really, trying to make sure that everything is working smoothly between all parties and that it's beneficial for everyone, I didn't want to put permanent infrastructure in right away, but for the time being, we're just running on caterpillar tunnels. Part of me farming part-time, which we can get into later, is I don't have time to come out here and raise and lower sides all the time, especially after rains push the sides down. So a 50-foot caterpillar tunnel will ventilate passively much better than a 100-foot caterpillar tunnel. At a previous farm where we had 100-foot caterpillar tunnels, if the sides were down and it got hot, there would be a dead zone in the middle where there wasn't a lot of ventilation. We've always tended to see disease start there. So at 50 feet, air is able to travel the length of the tunnel. It's able to passively ventilate much better. And for the most part, the sides can just stay down. I don't notice a significant temperature difference in the center as opposed to the end. And for the summer months, we just leave the end walls completely off. They're really just there to protect from the rain and actually diffuse the light and provide a little bit of shade, and we'll cover some of them with shade cloth later in the summer. But that's another reason why we went down to 50-foot beds, is so that we could have 50-foot caterpillar tunnels and not have to worry so much about actively managing those for ventilation purposes. Okay, back to bed prep. So how we prepare beds is we go ahead and line them out the first time with a string. Now I only do this once, but I want to make sure that I've got my beds and my aisles exactly where they need to be. The first thing that we do is broad fork, and then we will add our amendments. Now the amendments that I use, I know there are a million philosophies on fertilization out there. But again, this being a part-time farm, and me having to dramatically simplify a lot of the processes so that it can keep moving forward. The fertilizer that I use is Revita Pro, which is a 5-4-5 composted chicken manure with kelp and some other micronutrients in there. And we will apply that at a rate of 5 pounds per bed. And then you can see how I got that calculation here, because I'm going for, on average, depending on the crop, about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Maybe a little underneath that, because we have such a high percentage of organic matter in this plot already. So I add 5 pounds to a 150 square foot bed. We will run the tilther to incorporate that into the soil profile, because we don't just want it sitting on the soil surface. From there, we add 2 to 3 inches of leaf mold. We also don't worry about raising the beds. Again, we don't have any drainage issues here, so raising the beds is going to be an unnecessary step. What we do instead is, after we broad fork and we add that leaf mulch, and then as we're walking in the aisleways, those beds will naturally raise a little bit, but it's not something that we actively worry about or manage, again, because we don't have any drainage issues. It's a wasted step. And just another general note on the design of this farm, from a layout perspective. So we have 4 plots with a 10-foot grass strip in between each plot. Now that's just for the ease of driving a vehicle. Say if we're driving a truckload of materials, say for the high tunnel construction, we can drive it right up where it needs to be. We also have plenty of room for 2 large wheelbarrows to pass one another if we're moving compost or harvesting out of the field and moving crops in for harvest rather. The other reason is I'm not quite up to the task of living pathways just yet, but we feel like this is a good intermediary step. So part of having the wood chips at the head and the foot of the bed is that's where water's naturally going to flow. So we have sort of a buffer to catch any compost, any sediment, any erosion. And then on top of that, we've got these grassways, which will further aid in keeping that material at least in the plot that it's supposed to be in.
All right, how awesome was that breakdown? If you enjoy our work, please consider picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or other merch at no-tillgrowers.com. Become a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.